The puppy shifted its gaze between a man and a woman, its eyes filled with indifference to its fate. He was the last pup. His siblings had already been taken by people. At first it was scary, but now he calmly watched it rushing by. "Ma'am, would you like this puppy? I have only one left." The mustached seller called out to the potential buyer. "Is it a purebred?" she asked, looking at him with doubt. "No, it's a mix, but he won't get sick easily. He's like a bloodhound, but as smart as a German shepherd." The seller promoted his product. "You can take them for free," the woman replied, her eyes still fixed on the puppy. "I beg to differ. This one is special. His mom is a race winner, and the dad is one of those you mentioned. I can show you the papers," the man said, smirking as he presented the documents. Indeed, the woman acknowledged. Mrs. Chelsea Leonard didn't have much money, not enough to buy the German shepherd she'd always dreamed of. Even this mixed breed would cost her a significant amount. She wanted to leave but couldn't stop staring at the adorable face of the lonely puppy, who reminded her of herself. "Don't worry, he'll be great company and an even better guard dog than a purebred. Retribution. I'll give you this training manual for free." Mrs. Leonard thought for a moment and decided that money couldn't buy happiness. The mustached seller would surely find a way to get rid of the puppy if no one bought it. That way, the poor pup would end up scavenging from trash cans, struggling to survive. "All right, I guess I'll take him," the woman smiled. The puppy sensed something was about to happen, and fear filled his eyes. He had lost his mom when he and his siblings were taken away. Then his brothers and sisters were gone too. Now the scariest part awaited, being taken away himself. Overwhelmed, he couldn't help but pee on the seller, who laughed as he handed the animal to the woman. Instead of rough hands, the puppy found himself in the soft, warm embrace of the woman. Snuggled against her chest, he relaxed and felt content. When Mrs. Leonard opened the door to her apartment, the puppy was already dozing, and so began their years-long friendship. Mrs. Leonard opened the door, and Milo, a medium-sized dog with intelligent eyes, bounded outside. He wagged his tail happily in farewell. She closed the door and glanced at her mobile phone screen. Milo would be back in an hour as part of his training to become more independent. Reached the past several months. Mimo had learned to go for walks on his own. This change came about when Chelsea's health declined to the point that she couldn't take Milo for walks every day. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Milo, so there were no conflicts. Children loved playing with him, and he even let the smallest ones ride on his back. This made Milo a beloved companion not only to Chelsea, but to most of the other residents in the building as well. Chelsea turned around and slowly walked back to her room. Though over 65 years old, each year brought an unpleasant diagnosis or a complication from an existing condition. Her heart was the primary concern, making itself known during bad weather when Milo pulled her around the park or when her stepson, Colby, caused trouble. The latter was especially difficult for her. Colby despised his stepmother ever since his father passed away. He acted as if she had killed his father, but Chelsea had loved her husband deeply. She always cared for Colby, trying her best to fill the void left by his late mother. Chelsea didn't know why Colby hated her so much. Perhaps it was jealousy, but they couldn't be a family as Chelsea's affection was always met with negativity. Colby's anger intensified when he drank, becoming furious that Chelsea lived in what he considered his father's apartment. He would demand she leave, but the apartment had been purchased jointly with Chelsea's husband, making it legally hers. Regardless, she would never kick her stepson out. Chelsea suspected that Colby's hatred and anger had altered him internally, preventing him from becoming a well-adjusted man. Colby was lonely, rude, and surrounded by fellow drinkers. Rarely sober, he struggled to find steady work and relied on odd jobs to make ends meet. He didn't try to change, only harboring hatred for everything and everyone. He blamed everyone but himself and his drinking. His drunken tirades often targeted Chelsea, accusing her of driving his father to an early grave when he drank alone at home. Loneliness only intensified his harsh words. Despite his rude behavior, Chelsea endured Colby's antics and tried to calm him, which only made things worse. Often these fights led to emergency services being called for the elderly woman, as her heart couldn't handle the stress. When Colby was caught for robbery and sent to jail, Chelsea enjoyed a brief respite. He was given a 5-year sentence, but was released after 1 year for good behavior. Upon his return, the fights resumed, and Chelsea's health quickly deteriorated. She knew she couldn't continue living like this and needed to take action. All Chelsea wanted was a peaceful life, but Colby was determined to make her miserable, intent on claiming the apartment for himself. From the beginning, Ice Kalkishanilal had never liked Colby. When Colby was drunk, he would throw empty bottles at Milo, causing the dog to hide in Chelsea's bedroom. Despite the abuse she endured herself, Chelsea fiercely protected Milo as if he were a baby. Gradually, Milo grew into a large dog and began to bark back. A year later, he even bit Colby once, which made Colby hysterical. After that incident, Colby stopped picking on the dog, and their relationship devolved into a cold war. Milo would growl and Colby would threaten to poison him, but fortunately, things never escalated beyond threats. Chelsea and Milo's friendship resembled that of a little girl and her dog. Unable to have children of her own due to medical reasons, Chelsea poured all her love into her pet, and Milo reciprocated. Milo brought her new life, and the training manual proved invaluable as Chelsea diligently trained Milo. He was intelligent, active, and a quick learner, treating the training like a game that made him happy. His ever-wagging tail confirmed his joy. Being retired allowed Chelsea plenty of free time, which she spent outdoors away from the alcohol-scented apartment. She was glad to be outside, keeping active and giving Milo space to run. In the first month, Milo learned to give his paw and fetch a stick. More complex commands followed, and soon Milo caught the attention of neighborhood children who watched his training. Initially hesitant, they gradually grew braver and approached Chelsea, asking to pet Milo. Chelsea initially worried that Milo might misinterpret the outstretched hands of the children as a threat, but his wagging tail reassured her otherwise. Milo gradually became the favorite dog in the neighborhood, and soon parents joined the children in interacting with him. One day, as Chelsea prepared to go to the store, she noticed Milo sleeping and decided not to wake him. Colby was snoring in his room. Got drunk again? At least he won't pick on Milo, Chelsea thought as she closed the door. Despite the gloomy autumn weather outside, Chelsea felt content. People with sullen faces walked past her, mirroring the dreary atmosphere. Chelsea wanted to smile at everyone. The pharmacist, seeing her long list of prescriptions, smiled back and asked if everything was okay with her. Meanwhile, Colby woke up, disturbed by the noise. He had a terrible hangover and frantically searched for something to drink, preferably with alcohol. Finding nothing, he opened his eyes, furious at everything around him and the source of the noise that woke him up. The noise was Milo's whining as he tried to get out of the apartment. "Stupid dog," Colby muttered, tolerating the dog's antics for a while before reaching his boiling point. He didn't want to get up, but the noise was too irritating to ignore. Finally, he got out of bed. "I'm gonna get you, you stupid dog," Colby threatened as he walked out. He noticed Chelsea wasn't home and wondered why she had left without her beloved dog. After standing there for a few minutes, an idea crossed his mind. He had long wanted to get rid of the old woman who he felt poisoned his life with her presence. He had considered numerous options, but since she refused to leave the apartment voluntarily, claiming it was legally hers, he resorted to targeting her health. If she ended up in the hospital, that was good. If she died, even better. As far as he knew, Chelsea had no other relatives, which meant he would be the legal heir to the apartment after her death. Colby knew how much Chelsea loved Milo and thought that if he could get rid of the dog, he would break her spirit. Milo had always growled at Colby when he approached his football, but now the dog was focused on getting out to find Chelsea. Colby thought that if he let Milo out now, the dog might get lost. He approached the front door, momentarily forgetting his hostile relationship with Milo. The dog reminded him by turning around and growling. "Calm down now, you doggy. I want to let you out to your mama." Milo looked at Colby suspiciously and stopped growling. Colby noticed that Milo had intelligent eyes as he took a careful step towards the door. Iolo watched him intently and didn't turn his back. Colby turned the lock, and a blast of cold wind brought a familiar smell with it. Milo happily bounded outside, and Colby whistled to himself as he returned to the kitchen to find a cure for his hangover. Despite his headache, he was in a good mood, just like Chelsea. Chelsea's mood took a dive when she saw that half of her pension would have to go towards paying for her medicine. She needed the money to live on and pay her bills. Since Colby didn't have an income, Chelsea was covering everything on her own. As she stood there lost in thought, the pharmacist interrupted her with a question. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Chelsea asked. "Is that your dog trying to get in?" The young woman pointed at the door with a smile. Chelsea turned around and was surprised to see Milo there. "Milo, what are you doing here?" Then she turned back to the pharmacist and said, "Yes, that's my dog Milo, but he was supposed to be asleep at home." Milo saw that Chelsea had noticed him and stopped trying to get in. He sat down and leaned his head to the side. With just one look, Milo made Chelsea smile and forget her worries. She paid for her medicine and walked out to give her pet a hug. Milo happily wagged his tail and swept the floor with his broomtail. "How did you get out, boy?" Chelsea asked. Milo licked Chelsea's face, and she was surprised at how he had found her. The road back home was winding, and she had come to this store because it offered discounts for retired people. She'd never taken Milo with her to the store, which meant he had followed her scent. This realization made Chelsea think. When she noticed that Milo couldn't have gotten out his own, she decided not to say anything to Colby. However, when Colby saw the dog happily wagging its tail, his face changed, which gave Chelsea an idea about him. Chelsea decided to try to train Milo to go to the store for her. Colby refused to help Chelsea, so Milo was her only hope. She didn't know if she could train him, but she was willing to try anyway. Her neighbors liked her, and she was known as a calm old woman, but not very sociable. People didn't talk to each other in that building. They just greeted each other, and that was it. However, the children loved Milo and showered him with affection. Colby was not well liked by the residents either. Chelsea felt lonely among thousands of people around her. "You have to scratch the door like this." Chelsea instructed Milo on how to open the store's door. The pharmacist was busy dealing with an old man, counting his bills. She glanced over and saw the familiar face of her regular customer, Chelsea and her dog. Milo gazed back and forth between them. Back and forth between the door and Chelsea. It wasn't clear what he wanted to do, so Chelsea repeated the command. "Mrs. Leonard, please come in." The young pharmacist smiled. Chelsea was instructing Milo. "Look, Milo, you have to hand over a note to this lady, all right? What are you guys doing?" The young woman smiled. "I'm training my dog to come here for me. Do you mind if I train my dog to bring you the prescriptions? I will be paying online, and Milo will be picking them up," Chelsea explained. The pharmacist looked doubtful and asked, "Don't you have any other options?" She'd never faced this request before in her career. Chelsea painted the picture that she had nobody else to turn to for help, and the young woman hesitantly agreed. She liked the dog and wanted to help the old woman. Over the next few weeks, Chelsea mustered all her strength to train her pet. It was tough to teach Milo to be independent, which was why she was letting him out alone for an hour. However, Milo often came running back because Chelsea was all he could think about. He would often whine, not understanding why Chelsea was behaving like that with him. Chelsea didn't enjoy hearing Milo's whining on one side and Colby swearing on the other side of the door. The next step was to teach Milo the route so that he could safely navigate around the city and across the streets on his own. This stage was quite easy and he passed it quickly. The hardest part of the training was still ahead of them. Chelsea had to make sure Milo could do everything when she gave him the command, as if sensing that he was being given an important task. It took Milo several tries to finally master it. A month later, Milo could do the route on his own for the first time, which was a rescue for Chelsea. That's one day. Chelsea woke up feeling extremely sick. Her blood pressure was high and her heart was pounding fast for no reason. When she got up from bed, she felt dizzy and it became dark in her eyes. "It's all right, Milo, we'll get through this," Chelsea told Milo, but her head was spinning and all she wanted to do at that point was collapse back onto the bed. But when she looked in the mirror, the picture was sad. She had circles under her eyes. Her face was swollen and she breathed heavily, and this was only because she had gotten out of bed. I'm old," Chelsea thought to herself, feeling sad. She walked to the stand and was shocked to realize that she didn't have her medicine. There was just a note with a list of things she needed to buy from the pharmacist. She looked at Milo and said that it was his time to shine. She wasn't feeling well at all. She called Milo and he came to her, looking at her with concerned eyes. She stuck the note to his collar and barely walked to the door. She unlocked it and cracked it open. Milo looked at Chelsea one more time with sad eyes and stepped forward. "Ought to help Milo," Chelsea said. Milo looked at her questioningly as if he didn't know who or what God was, or simply didn't want to leave her alone. Chelsea looked at Milo as if it were the last time she'd see him, then closed the door. She had to muster all her strength to make it back to her bed. Finally there, she fell unconscious. Milo made his way down the stairs and jumped outside. Children were throwing stones into puddles, and when they noticed Milo, they ran to him. They thought he was let out to play and wanted to include him in their games. But Milo only looked at them and made his way around the noisy crowd. He remembered the command stamped in his mind, and he knew the sin that awaited him at the finish line. Milo walked by people's feet on the sidewalk. Most people already recognized him and weren't afraid of him. He made his way to the first set of traffic lights. There were 3 more ahead, but he made the trip without any problems. He was driven by instinct, and it helped him avoid dangerous obstacles. He noticed a familiar signboard on the horizon and recognized a scent coming from the place. Milo drooled as if he sensed food, but the place had something much more important than food. Something that would make his owner feel better. When Milo finally made it to the drugstore door, he scratched it with his paw. There were people walking back and forth inside, but the door had a sign. When Milo was here with Chelsea, he didn't see any signs. He tilted his head as if trying to read the sign. Nobody came out to him. The sign said, "Closed." Milo waited for a long time, scratching the door once in a while to attract attention. He would have kept sitting there if not for the scent that caught his attention. It was a scent similar to what he smelled from the drugstore, but weaker. The scent was coming from someone who was standing across the street. The scent of medicine mixed with the scent of hot meat. Milo was unsure of what to do. Should he stay or go after the person who gave off the similar smell? Suddenly, the smell of hot meat increased, and he took off after the man. When he crossed the street, the man was far away. But Milo didn't need the man. He was after the scent of medicine, similar to the one that came from the door. Alan Davis was a surgeon in a clinic and had enough work to do. He had a lot of patients that day. He was surprised at how many people injured themselves in such a small town. On one hand, the injuries weren't serious, but on the other hand, people ran to the hospital as soon as they sneezed. He often got so tired that he didn't even have the energy to eat his dinner. It was afternoon and Alan was outside getting some fresh air. He was looking at the gray sky and naked trees. Autumn was giving way to winter, but Alan didn't feel any emotions about it. Alan noticed a figure of his assistant across the street. He was being followed by a large dog that looked like a German shepherd, but smaller. The assistant made his way across to the other side of the street, and Alan asked him, "Chris, did you make new friends?" and laughed. "Excuse me, did you say something?" Agent, Chris asked. Taking out his earphones, "Is that your dog?" "Right." "No," Chris said, and walked into the clinic. Milo was confidently moving towards the door of the clinic. The scent of medicine brought him to the source. When the door suddenly closed in front of him, he got surprised and looked at Alan. He hadn't noticed Alan before. "Hey buddy, what's up?" Alan asked Milo. Milo replied with a short bark. "Well, I'm Alan Davis. Nice to meet you." Alan leaned in and stuck his hand out, to which Milo unexpectedly gave his paw, solidifying their new friendship. Milo looked at the door and then at the doctor, as if asking to be let in. He tilted his head to the side. "Sorry, bud. I can't let you in. We gotta keep the place sterile." The doctor smiled. Then he noticed something strange on Milo's collar. He looked closer and realized that it was a note wrapped in a plastic bag. Alan was intrigued. What could that be? He tried to pet the dog, and Milo accepted his petting with ease. Alan decided to get the note and read it. This is just a list of cheap medicines. "So I'm guessing you were sent by the owner." Milo barked loudly and started wagging his tail energetically. "Then she probably can't come to this drugstore herself, huh? Well, my friend, you've come to the wrong place." "This is not a drugstore," Alan said thoughtfully. Alan came to the medical field because he had always wanted to, but also because his father wanted him to continue the legacy. However, when he realized how tough the medical system was, he was disappointed. He was a talented surgeon and treated his patients with care. He was a very respected specialist in the clinic and greatly improved its reputation. But he would always argue with the bosses when patients could be treated using less expensive methods. He would have been fired a long time ago, but the bosses knew that he was bringing in a stable flow of money. Alan's personal life didn't work out well for him because nobody was interested in someone who was sick with altruism. Nevertheless, he had what everybody else had, a place to call home, a vacation once a year. But he had something that most people didn't, conscience. It was conscience that made him react at this particular moment too. Judging by the list of medicines, the owner of the dog was poor throughout his career. Alan has seen a lot of fates, which often were quite tragic. However, the experience didn't turn him into a cynical person. He quickly skimmed through the list again and made a mental note that the owner of the dog had a heart disease. It wouldn't hurt to call the cardiologist. "Buddy, do you think you can take me back to your owner? I could help her out." Alan turned to Milo. He perked up and wagged his tail. "Hold on a moment," the dog said and looked inside. His assistant. Chris was waiting for him. I'm gonna be out for a while. Chris, Elaine shouted and closed the door before he could say anything. Alan didn't have much money on him, but it was enough to buy all the medicines listed in the note. He bought other pills that were more effective and more expensive. He tied the bag with all the medicines to the dog's collar, thinking that's how it was supposed to be brought to the owner. As soon as Alan stuck the bag to the collar, Ilamo jogged along the sidewalk. Alan followed behind. Milo sensed that the dog was following him and didn't rush. Alan noted the exceptional intelligence of the dog that behaved in the city more civilized than some human beings. They had walked about an hour, and the dog brought him to an apartment building that didn't really stand out a few miles from the clinic. "Wow, you sure made a long journey to get to me," Alan said to Milo. Milo stopped in front of one entry and looked at Alan as if telling him to get the door. At that point, a boy came running and said, "Hey, Milo." The boy looked at Alan suspiciously and retreated back to the sandbox. "So, your name is Milo, huh? All right, Milo, show me the way." Milo ran up the stairs and began scratching the door. "Let me try." Alan smiled and rang the doorbell. It didn't really give any results. The doorbell was broken, and Alan knocked. He kept knocking, but nobody answered. A thought flashed in his mind that he was too late. That would have been the worst turn of events for Alan. At some point, he heard some noises behind the door. The lock turned, and Alan heard some grumbles. It was a horsemeal voice. Isla growled displeased. That's when Alan realized that Milo could be angry sometimes. The door opened, and an extremely unpleasant face was looking at Alan. He was a young guy, a lot younger than Alan, but booze made him look like he was old. The face looked swollen from constant drinking. Judging by the disheveled hair, he had woken up recently. His clothes were dirty and smelly, as if ignoring cleanliness was one of the life principles of the guy. But the smell wafting from his mouth painted a complete picture for Alan. "What do you want?" he barked, forgoing any greeting. He hadn't noticed Milo yet. "Hello for starters. I'm a doctor, here to see the patient." Alan decided to set boundaries because he knew that with these kinds of people, one needed to be polite but firm. "Version, I didn't call anyone." "You got the wrong door. It was a woman who called." Gerstrit Svebelin said. "She's been sleeping all day." "How could she call you?" The alcoholic insisted, not wanting to let him in. "She placed a call a few days earlier." "Why are you telling me these tales, man?" "I'm gonna call the cops." Alan expected this reaction. He was preparing himself for a lengthy debate and possibly a fight, but Milo stepped up at that moment and growled. "You stupid dog, where did you come from?" Colby's voice cracked from surprise, and he stumbled back into the apartment. Milo walked in, making it easier for Alan to deal with the situation. "Where is she?" Alan asked Colby. Colby just turned around and walked away into one of the rooms. Milo headed towards another. Alan looked around and saw dust, empty bottles. Everything reeked of poverty. It made sense why Colby had acted the way he did. The walls looked like they hadn't been tended to for 30 years. The wallpaper had faded and lost its initial colors. A thick layer of dust covered some areas. It was clear that the apartment's residents weren't able to keep the place clean. Alan approached her door and knocked. Having received permission, he entered. This room was much cleaner than the rest of the apartment, but the air was stale. The woman greeted him weakly. "Hello, I'm sorry for the mess. I just don't feel well enough to clean up right now. Milo, come down, baby." Chelsea was having a hard time keeping a whining Milo from licking her face. Milo seemed to say, "See, I made it." It was clear that Milo loved his owner with the affectionate and genuine love that only dogs can provide. "Hi, I'm Elin Davis. I'm Milo and I met by chance. I'm a doctor. I trained him to fetch me medicine, but never thought of inviting doctors." Chelsea smiled and petted Milo behind the ear, which made him even happier. "I'm Chelsea Leonard, doing what most retired people do, being sick." Chelsea looked quite ill, to say the least. Although Alan wasn't a cardiologist, her appearance suggested she needed hospitalization. Meanwhile, Chelsea opened the bag of medicines. Her face contorted with concern. "Oh no, all these medicines are expensive. This is gonna make me go broke." "It's all right. Mrs. Leonard, this is on me, ma'am. You don't have to pay. You better tell me what's going on. Unfortunately, I'm a surgeon, not a cardiologist, but still." Chelsea looked at Alan as if he was a saint, and Alan felt awkward. Chelsea began telling her long story. The more Alan listened, the more he felt sympathy for her. Although he didn't specialize in this field, things were still very serious. He realized he had arrived just in time. Chelsea finished telling her story, which had been difficult for her to share when leaned back on the pillow. Alan had one question in his mind. When didn't you get hospitalized? Chelsea quietly rolled her eyes and pointed in the direction of the noise. It sounded like the alcoholic was trying to get himself a drink. Alan's heart pounded with fury. He wanted to say something, but remembered to be polite. All right, one problem at a time, deal? Chelsea nodded gratefully and smiled. I'm gonna make a few calls and we'll get you to the cardiologist. You will receive treatment and hopefully feel better. He dialed a doctor he knew. Among coworkers. Alan was known for his sense of fairness and honesty. Palmer speaking. Chilitz, all and heard on the other side. Hey Tevin, this is Aliel. Alan explained Chelsea's situation and asked for help. I know you like to make problems out of thin air, but I've never been part of them before. The colleague smirked. Alan managed to convince Kevin and arranged for Chelsea to be admitted to the hospital. Into the hospital? Ilan, you owe me, man. Kevin hung up the phone. Alan turned to Chelsea and said, well, now we have to get you to the clinic. Do you need help to pack things up? What about Milo? Chelsea's face looked concerned. That's if you're okay with it. I can take him for the time being, the doctor offered. He liked Milo and would be happy to spend some time running with the dog in the park. Mr. Davis, you're like an angel from above who came to my rescue. I don't know how I can repay you, Chelsea exclaimed sincerely. I'm not sure we're angels, even though we do wear white gowns. As for repaying me, I'll accept you're getting well. No questions asked. Alan smiled and started dialing a taxi. When the three of them were exiting the apartment, the stepson's face emerged from the room. Where are you all going? He asked, surprised. His face looked happier. He'd probably found the magic water. Colby, I'm going to the hospital, Chelsea told him. Alan was surprised at the compliant tone of her voice, considering Colby's behavior. What hospital are you talking about? Mrs. Leonard, we barely have money for food. We're going to die of hunger after the clinic. Everything is going to be all right, Chelsea smiled in response. No, it's not. Who the heck is this guy? Is this even a doctor or a scammer playing a doctor? His objections. I'm not giving you the apartment. Colby began accusing them of conspiracy. Let's forget about the apartment. Go hide in your room before I forget. I'm a doctor and remember how much I hate alcoholics. The fear that had been building up in Alan upon seeing this despicable man began to spill out. He tried to keep it to himself and not let it out, but Colby's last words made him boil. It seemed that Colby understood the change in the mood of the once polite doctor and thought it was better to follow the doctor's advice. You're gonna die. Mrs. Leonard, that's even better for me. Colby slammed the door and disappeared. The taxi was waiting outside. It was a new car, as I'm a hobby driver and I don't do this full time. I have my own business. I love my car and unfortunately, I can't let your dog in my car, the driver announced. Achnamadi? Well then take the woman to the clinic, and Milo and I will take a walk. Do you mind? Mrs. Leonard? Alan asked and smiled. I think Milo likes you a lot, and he'd love to have a walk. I'll see you guys in the hospital. She replied weakly. He'll come by later. You can go ahead and get examined. Palmer is a good cardiologist and generally a positive guy. See you soon. Milo followed the departing car with his gaze and looked at Alan as if asking, so what now, human? Let's go for a walk, Alan asked, and they began to walk. Alan's home was quite far, and they made it there in the evening. They were both satisfied with the work they had completed during the day. They quickly had dinner and went to sleep. Milo was unpretentious when it came to food. He ate whatever Ainley and lay spread out at his feet, knowing that his owner was probably doing well. Alan's actions didn't go unnoticed. He gave his boss a reason to deprive him of his monthly bonus for leaving the workplace in the middle of the day. Then, a long lecture on workplace discipline followed, which Alan listened to with an ironic smile, knowing that his leave at least saved someone's life. Meanwhile, the head doctor's constant drinking caused some incidents. Even his driver's license was suspended for 3 years despite connections in the police and the DMV. Despite losing the bonus and enduring the boring lecture from the hypocrite, Alan's mood didn't change, which made the head doctor mad. When Alan stepped out into the hallway, he caught sight of Kevin Palmer walking at the other end. Kevin saw him too and waved. Then they shook hands. Good deeds don't go unnoticed. Kevin smiled. Yeah, just got it confirmed. Alan replied, It's all right. I meant something else. I'll show you. It Kevin led Alan to the department and showed Chelsea's medical card. It showed complications upon complications. The cardiologist explained what caused what and talked about threats and dangers. "All right, Mr. Panic, make it shorter, please." Alan left. "In short, you were just in time." Rish's scout. A week later, she would be gone. Alan felt a sense of pride. It felt good to do good. "All right, how much did everything cost?" Elaine asked. He knew that Chelsea had no relatives and friends. She had nobody to turn to for help, and therefore he decided to put her back on her feet. He was determined to cover all the costs. Meanwhile, Milo looked at his owner from the second floor. When their eyes met, Milo's ears perked up, and for Chelsea, it was like a balm to her soul. She hadn't seen Alan ever since she got in the taxi that day. It had been a week since then. Cardiologist Kevin thought that she might be Alan's relative or something. Chelsea had no idea what having relatives meant. Her parents had passed away early. She didn't really feel loved either. The relatives quickly forgot about her existence because they had enough of their own problems. People in the ward talked about the same things over and over, their own illnesses. Milo visited every day and sat outside her window or followed her commands. Chelsea would gesture and the intelligent Milo performed. This was a favorite pastime not only for them, but for other patients as well. At around 5 in the afternoon, Milo would leave, looking around guiltily. It was probably because Alan's shift was nearing its end, and it was time to go home. Alan finally visited Chelsea at the end of the week. Her health was gradually improving. Chelsea was going through her old photos and remembering her past life. She didn't have many photographs, but they were so dear to her and replaced books for her. Each one had a history behind it. "Hi, Mrs. Leonard. Do you still remember me?" Alan greeted her. "I don't think I will ever forget my guardian angel." "Hi." Chelsea smiled softly and Alan placed a bag with some sweets on the stand. "How do you feel? Young and beautiful again?" "Everything is great. Did your stepson visit at least?" "Of course not. He's probably waiting for me to die finally." "Well, not yet. Show me your photographs." Alan noticed the album. "Oh, this is just a story of my life. I don't have many, but they're all mine." Chelsea blushed. It was something deeply personal for her, and the question caught her off guard. She never discussed the stories even with her late husband. She was surprised Alan was interested. You see, a particular photo caught Alan's attention, and he frowned. "Stories, hon? Do you mind sharing one with me?" "To be honest, I've never shared my stories before, but I'm going to do it with you. You're such a kind-hearted person. Go ahead and choose the picture." Alan didn't really have a choice. His mind was concentrated on the photo from the moment he saw the album, and he pointed exactly at it. Chelsea turned pale because that was one of the most tragic stories in her life. "Don't worry too much. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. It's all right. I will tell you the story of this photo." Chelsea was a first-year student in medical school. She loved her studies and the profession was very prestigious. She was a bright student and spent most of her time studying. Her friends always tried to make her go out and meet guys, but Chelsea was adamant until one day when she met Carl. They met during their internship, and he was a geek like her. The only difference was that he studied therapy. They spent a lot of time together, and gradually their friendship turned into something bigger. That's how they started going out. Discussions of medical cases slowly turned to love poems, stargazing on the dorm roof, and the confession during the prom. After Carl's confession, Chelsea realized that she couldn't live without him. They loved each other, and that seemed to be the most important thing for the sweet couple. Later on, Carl introduced Chelsea to his parents. Ours mother, Mrs. Tilson, didn't like Chelsea at all. The couple couldn't understand why. Carl's dad was more neutral, but he wasn't the leader in the family. Every time Mrs. Tilson had a chance, she commented that Chelsea was no match for Carl. They constantly had arguments about that. Once, Chelsea felt sick during her class. Judging by the symptoms, it was clear that it was toxicosis. She tested positive for pregnancy. At first, she was frightened. She didn't know what she was going to say to Carl. She was scared of giving birth and couldn't picture herself as a mother, although she had always wanted to understand what a happy family felt like. Carl wasn't afraid of anything at all. When he learned about the pregnancy, his eyes flashed with brightness. He didn't think about what was going to happen tomorrow, or what obstacles were ahead of him when he became a father. As a future doctor, he knew all the medical aspects of being pregnant, but it wasn't his concern at all. The same evening, he broke the news to his parents. At first, it caused a commotion, but eventually they accepted his decision. But then something surprising happened. Mrs. Tilson became so soft and nice to Chelsea. She was almost like a best friend to her. She helped Chelsea in any way she could and was with her all the time. She arranged appointments with the best gynecologist, picked a maternity hospital, and promised to provide her first grandchild with the best of things. Even when it was time to give birth, Mrs. Tilson took Chelsea to the hospital. During the birth, Chelsea lost consciousness. When she woke up, she realized she was in a totally different ward and under a drip. She didn't have the weight in her belly. She tried to move but couldn't. The nurse who was passing by at that time noticed that she was up and calmed her down. Chelsea fell asleep. When she woke up, Mrs. Tilson was sitting next to her. When Chelsea saw the familiar face, she burst into tears. But Mrs. Tilson's face was cold and pale, as if something bad had happened. She pierced Chelsea with her gaze for a long time, and then said, "Chelsea, the baby didn't make it. I had been telling you that you guys were no match from the get-go. Look what it brought us to. You were in a coma for several months, and they couldn't save the baby. He was born dead. I think you and Carl should break up. He's not having a good time because of what happened. He doesn't even want to see you. We covered all the bills for you, but you need to leave my son alone. You will find your man, believe me. I'm sorry. Chelsea, this is good for everyone. Texico, goodbye." Mrs. Tilson exited the ward, and Chelsea had never seen her since then. When I got back on my feet and returned to normal life, I dropped out and traveled around, trying to find my place under the sun. No matter how far I went, eventually I returned to my hometown. I married my widowed husband, who was raising a child. Paul was a good husband and an honorable man. Don't judge him by Colby. He didn't take after his father at all. Mr. Davis, are you all right? You won't believe it, but I have a similar story. Alain began with a subdued voice. The only difference is that during the birth, the mother died and I survived. My grandma isn't pregnant. Mrs. Tilson brought me home. My father was denied access to my mother. Grandma said that she was cremated. Dad raised me alone, which didn't hinder him from becoming an excellent physician. He never remarried. What would you say if I told you we should do a DNA test? What for? Well, compare stories for any matches. Elin smirked. I'm inclined to think it's just a wild coincidence, but still, I will cover the expenses. Smikes and Celius. I don't mind at all, Chelsea replied calmly. Alan smoothly changed the topic. They talked about Milo's goofy pranks and his success in performing the commands that the doctor taught him and other details. This just kept them talking. Then they said goodbye and Alan went home. On the way home, he dropped by a grocery store and bought some things for dinner. His things for dinner and a bottle of whiskey. But that night, he got drunk for the first time in his life. The man in the patient's photo that he saw back in the hospital was none other than Carl Davis, his father. Surprisingly, the first DNA test gave negative results, but it was not a rarity. Then, Alan ordered 3 more tests from 3 different companies. He had all the results in his room. The first envelope showed positive results. It felt like Russian roulette to him. The time he waited lasted forever, and there he was, looking at the last 2 envelopes that 2 people's fates depended on. For some time, Alan couldn't make himself open the envelopes. He was just looking out through the window. The overcast sky was sharing the first snow with the ground. The doctor was scared of both outcomes. If Chelsea turned out to be his mother, then his grandma would have broken 3 lives. His father's and his mother's. If not, then his last hopes to figure out his mother's fate would be broken. Finally, he opened the envelopes. Aki, Divis speaking. Hey, Dad. Still haven't saved my number? Hitherland. What's up, son? Yeah, I can't figure out this darn thing. How are you? Better than anyone. And you know why? Aki, son of a gun. Why? Dad, if you're standing, please take a seat. Okay, done. Are you getting married or something? No, Dad. I found Mom. Then there was silence, followed by shock and a hasty narration of how a dog named Milo and its adventure connected the lost souls that were unjustly thrown apart. Despite happening at the dusk of their lives, Chelsea and Carl finally reclaimed what they had lost 40 years ago. The family reunited. The father, mother, and son were happy despite the bitterness of the years they lived apart. Chelsea was getting healthy fast, and only after she was discharged did Alan decide to tell her the truth. And then she met Carl. They were a lot of tears and hugs. It felt as if Carl and Chelsea had never broken up all those years and were just away from each other on a business trip. Since then, the Davis family's favorite pastime was walking in the park, and their route was determined by the dog named Milo. As for Colby, he partially got what he wanted because Chelsea moved to her husband's house. But he wasn't happy in the apartment for too long. He managed to get caught robbing again and went to jail. Thank you for listening to this story. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.